Long before memory turned into legend, beyond the Sapphire Mountains and along the banks of the Silver Arden River, there stood the radiant kingdom of Valareth. Its towers shimmered at sunrise. Its markets overflowed with silk, grain, and spices from distant lands. Its people lived in peace. And yet, within the grand marble palace, King Alaric Dovane lay awake every night in silence. He had ruled for 42 winters. His decisions had prevented wars. His wisdom had ended famine. His mercy had won him loyalty deeper than fear ever could. But he had no heir, no son, no daughter, no blood to inherit the crown. The royal physicians could do nothing. The scholars offered hollow comfort. The nobles whispered in corridors when they thought he could not hear. If the king falls, who will rule? Power will divide us. Alaric heard every whisper. One cold evening, leaning heavily on his carved obsidian cane, the king summoned his closest advisor, Chancellor Merrick. "Merrick," Alaric said quietly, staring into the hearth flames, "a kingdom does not collapse when enemies attack. It collapses when leadership becomes unworthy." Merrick bowed. "Your Majesty, we can appoint a noble house. The council can vote." "No," Alaric interrupted. "Nobles crave power. I seek someone who does not." The next dawn, before the city stirred, King Alaric left the palace disguised in a plain cloak. Only Marek accompanied him. They rode beyond the farms, past Shepherd Hills, and deep into the Ashwood Forest, where an old sage named Seraphel lived in quiet solitude. Seraphel had once guided kings. Now he guided only the wind. When Alaric entered the humble wooden hermitage, he removed his crown and placed it on the floor. "I am afraid," the king confessed. Seraphel's eyes were ancient, clear as still water. "You are not afraid of death," the sage replied softly. "You are afraid of what survives you." The king lowered his gaze. "I need someone worthy," he said. "Not ambitious, not loud, worthy." Seraphel closed his eyes for a long moment. Silence stretched. Outside, leaves rustled. Then the sage smiled faintly. "There is a way," he whispered. Alaric leaned closer. Seraphel spoke not loudly, but what he described caused the king's troubled expression to slowly change. Confusion, then realization, then hope. When Alaric rose to leave, his back seemed straighter. As he placed the crown back upon his head, Seraphel said one final thing. "Remember, Majesty, the greatest test of leadership is not strength." The king paused. "It is restraint." And with that, a plan was set into motion that would shake the entire kingdom. Messengers on white stallions thundered through cobbled streets. Crimson banners unfurled from balconies. Drums rolled in the city square. By midday, every village from the Frostmere Valley to the southern dunes had heard the decree. Chancellor Merrick stepped onto the palace balcony and read aloud. "Hear this, people of Valareth. By order of King Alaric Dovane, whoever reaches the gates of the royal palace before tomorrow's sunset shall be named heir to the throne." Gasps rippled through the crowd. No bloodline requirement, no noble birth condition, no trials of combat. Just one condition: arrive before sunset. Merchants stared at each other in disbelief. Farmers abandoned their carts mid-sail. Young men clenched their fists with sudden ambition. From the back of the square, a blacksmith laughed. "The palace is only half a day's ride. This is the simplest challenge ever declared." Marek, standing beside the king, leaned closer. "Your Majesty, forgive my boldness, but will not thousands arrive?" King Alaric's expression remained unreadable. "Thousands will begin," he replied. "And finish?" Marek asked. The king said nothing. Across the kingdom, preparations erupted like wildfire. A wealthy trader named Lucian Harrow ordered his finest horse saddled. "This crown will sit better on a businessman than a warrior," he boasted. A young soldier polished his armor. "I have discipline," he muttered. "I will not fail." Even farmers who had never stepped beyond their fields packed bread and set out, hope blazing in their chests. Among them was a quiet cartmaker's apprentice named Caelan Thorne. He owned no horse, no armor, no grand ambition. But when he heard the announcement, something stirred inside him. Not greed, not excitement, purpose. His mentor, old Garin the carpenter, watched him lace his worn boots. You think you can be king, boy? Garen asked with a teasing smirk. Kalen shrugged softly. I don't know if I can be king, but I can walk. And if others are faster? I will not race them, Kalen replied calmly. I will walk. Garen studied him for a long moment. Then remember why you walk. As dawn broke the next day, the roads leading to Valareth filled with thousands. Horses galloped, wagons rattled, boots pounded dust into the air. Ambition surged like a tide. From the palace tower, King Alaric watched the distant roads darken with movement. Behind him, in the courtyard unseen by the crowd, carpenters were finishing elaborate structures, silk tents, long banquet tables, colorful flags, stages, perfumed lanterns. What had once been an empty stretch of road between the outer gates and the palace entrance had transformed overnight. It was no ordinary path anymore. It was something far more dangerous. By mid-morning, the first wave of contenders reached the outer valley, and there, stretching as far as the eye could see, stood a magnificent festival. Music drifted on the breeze. Laughter rose like birds into the sky. Golden signs read, "Welcome, honored guests." The road to the palace now passed directly through it, and the true test had begun. By the time the first riders slowed their horses, the scent had already reached them. Roasted lamb glazed in honey and crushed herbs. Freshly baked loaves split open with steam rising from their centers. Spiced rice jeweled with pomegranate seeds. Figs soaked in sweet wine. Almond cakes dusted with sugar like early snow. Long tables stretched across the road itself, forcing every traveler to either stop or push through the gathering crowd. At the entrance stood servants dressed in royal blue, bowing politely. "Welcome, honored guests," one called brightly. "His Majesty has ordered that all who journey today be treated with royal hospitality." Lucian Harrow, the wealthy trader, dismounted first. His silk cloak fluttered behind him as he surveyed the spread. "Well," he chuckled, "a king must know fine cuisine. It would be foolish not to taste what my future chefs prepare." He removed his gloves and sat. Nearby, a farmer hesitated. "Should we not continue?" he asked nervously. "Continue on an empty stomach?" Lucian scoffed. "Leadership requires strength." That was all it took. One by one, they sat. Bowls were filled, goblets poured. Laughter replaced urgency. "I will eat quickly," one young contender promised himself, "just enough to steady my hunger." But flavors lingered. Spices warmed the tongue, meat melted tenderly. Wine loosened conversation. Time thinned quietly. Further back on the road, Kalen Thorne approached on foot. He had been walking steadily since dawn, breath calm, steps even. When the smell reached him, his stomach tightened. He had brought only a small pouch of dried barley. He saw the tables, the golden trays, the glistening fruit. For a moment he slowed. His body whispered, "Rest, eat. You deserve this." A servant stepped forward, smiling warmly. "You look weary, friend. Sit. No cost. The king himself insists." Kalen's eyes drifted over the food. He swallowed. "I thank you," he said quietly, "but I cannot stay." The servant tilted his head. "It is only a short meal." Kalen met his gaze. "Every delay feels short when you begin it." And he walked forward. Some laughed as he passed. "Look at him!" someone shouted. "Too proud for honeyed figs." Another called, "The palace won't vanish, boy." Kalen did not answer. The path curved beyond the feast, and there, rising in vibrant color and sound, stood something even grander. Music thundered from towering stages. Silk banners swayed overhead. Crowds clapped and cheered, and just ahead, dancers began to move like living fire. Behind him, the feast roared with indulgent joy. Ahead, the festival pulsed with irresistible life. Kalen tightened his grip on his small satchel and continued walking. If the feast tempted the body, the stage tempted the soul. As Kalen stepped beyond the final banquet table, the air itself seemed to vibrate. Drums rolled like distant thunder. Flutes sang high and sweet. A chorus of voices rose in perfect harmony. Before him towered a grand wooden stage draped in crimson silk. Lanterns of colored glass swayed overhead, casting shifting jewels of light across the crowd. Performers from every corner of Valareth had gathered. A violinist drew his bow so delicately the sound felt like memory itself. A singer with silver hair held a note so pure that conversations died mid-sentence. Dancers leapt and spun in flowing garments, their feet barely seeming to touch the earth. People who had resisted the feast now stood frozen here. A young soldier who had marched with rigid discipline that morning lowered his helmet slowly. "Just one song," he murmured. Beside him, a scholar clasped his hands, eyes shining. Such art must be appreciated. A ruler must value culture. On stage, an actress began performing a dramatic tale, the story of a humble man who became king through destiny. The crowd leaned closer. Lucian Harrow, wiping honey from his fingers, wandered in from the feast and laughed. "See, even fate applauds me." Hours slipped like sand through open fingers. Further along, Kalen approached the edge of the gathering. The music touched him deeply. He had grown up shaping wood while humming simple tunes. Sound had always moved him. A dancer spun past the crowd, her movements fluid as river water. She smiled directly at him. "You walk alone," she said gently. "Stay. Stories are being told." Kalen watched the stage. He felt the pull, not of pleasure, but of belonging. He imagined sitting just for a moment, listening, resting. His feet ached. The dancer's voice softened. "The palace will still stand when the last note fades." He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were steady. "I cannot rule a kingdom," he replied quietly, "if I cannot rule my own pause." The dancer studied him, not offended, not amused, but thoughtful. Then she stepped aside. As he moved forward, a roar erupted from the far side of the festival grounds. Cheers, shouts, the pounding rhythm of competition. Beyond the music waited something even louder, something sharper, something that awakened pride. The games had begun. The music faded behind him, replaced by the raw thunder of competition. Kalen stepped into a wide clearing carved into the valley floor. Banners snapped in the wind above wooden arenas, hastily constructed but impressively grand. Crowds pressed around roped circles where men grappled in wrestling pits, muscles straining, faces red with effort. Nearby, archers lined up at painted targets, arrows slicing through air with satisfying precision. Further ahead, horses tore across a racing track, hooves shaking the earth. Spectators roared with every tight turn. At the center stood a raised platform where a booming announcer cried, "Strength, skill, courage, prove your worth before you prove your claim." The soldier who had lingered at the music now strode confidently toward the wrestling ring. "This," he declared, "is a test worthy of a crown." He entered the pit. Cheers erupted as he threw his first opponent to the sand. The scholar who had justified the feast now stood at the archery line. A ruler must have precision, he reasoned, releasing arrow after arrow to applause. Lucian Harrow adjusted his gloves and approached the horsemaster. "If I am to be king," he said proudly, "the people must see my command." He mounted the fastest stallion and joined the race. Victory brought garlands. Winners were lifted onto shoulders. Crowds chanted names. Each success felt intoxicating. "I will just prove myself once," many thought. But proving oneself is addictive. One match became two. One race became another. One applause demanded a louder one. Time moved unnoticed. At the edge of the arena, a herald spotted Kalen passing by. "You there," the herald called. "You have the build of a laborer, strong arms. Enter the strength trial. Show your might." Kalen paused. The wrestling pit was familiar ground. Years of lifting timber had shaped his body without ceremony. He knew he could compete, perhaps even win. The thought stirred something dangerous, not desire for pleasure, but desire for recognition. For a moment, he imagined the crowd shouting his name. The herald grinned. "The king values bravery." Kalen's jaw tightened slightly. "Does he?" he asked calmly. "Of course," the herald replied. "What is a ruler without glory?" Kalen glanced toward the distant palace towers barely visible beyond the festival. "A ruler," he said slowly, "without control is only loud." The herald frowned. "You would refuse glory?" Kalen met his gaze. "I would refuse delay." He walked on. Behind him, the soldier celebrated another victory. Lucian demanded a rematch after losing his race. The scholar argued over scoring. The sun had begun its descent, but the greatest temptation had yet to reveal itself. Beyond the arena stood tall velvet tents glowing in the afternoon light. soft laughter drifted from within, and servants poured crystal cups of dark red wine. The roar of the arena slowly softened behind him, replaced by something smoother, slower, perfumed air, low laughter, the gentle clink of crystal. Before Kalen stretched a series of elegant pavilions arranged like a royal garden. Silken curtains swayed in the warm breeze. Cushions lay scattered across rich carpets. Golden lamps glowed softly even though daylight had not yet faded. At the entrance, attendants in fine robes bowed deeply. "Rest your spirit," one said warmly. "The journey has been long." Inside, long tables displayed crystal decanters filled with dark ruby wine and amber spirits aged for decades. Trays of delicate pastries sat untouched, as though waiting only for honored hands. A sign above the entrance read, "For future kings, a moment of ease." Lucian Harrow arrived shortly after losing his third race. Sweat darkened his silk collar. "Ah," he sighed, lifting a cup offered to him. "At last, refinement." He drank deeply. The soldier from the arena entered with bruised pride and accepted a goblet without hesitation. Victory requires recovery, he told himself. Soon laughter grew louder, conversations blurred, the urgency of the morning faded into warm comfort. A musician played softly in one corner, notes drifting like lazy smoke. Kalen slowed. He could feel exhaustion now. The sun had traveled far across the sky. His legs ached. His throat was dry. An attendant approached him gently. "You look tired," she said kindly. "Even the strongest falter without rest." He studied her face. It was sincere, or expertly trained to seem so. "Just a sip," she encouraged. "No man thinks clearly while parched." His throat tightened at the sight of the cool liquid. One sip would not end his journey. One cup would not erase his purpose. He reached toward the goblet and stopped. He remembered something Garen once told him while shaping a stubborn piece of oak. "If you soften the wood too much, it bends where you don't intend." Kalen lowered his hand. "My mind must stay sharper than my thirst," he said quietly. The attendant's smile faded slightly. "You refuse comfort?" "I refuse forgetfulness." He stepped past the velvet curtains. Behind him, voices grew louder and less distinct. Laughter became slurred. Some men leaned back on cushions, staring at nothing in particular. Others promised to leave in just a moment. But moments multiply easily in soft places. The sky now burned orange. Only a narrow stretch of road remained between Kalen and the palace gates. Yet the final temptation waited there, quieter than the others, but far more personal. The air changed as Kalen stepped beyond the final pavilion. The noise of wine and laughter faded into a hush. Ahead, the road narrowed, lined with tall ivory columns wrapped in flowering vines. Lanterns flickered softly, though the sun had not yet fully set. The sky glowed amber and rose, shadows stretching long across the stones. It felt peaceful, almost sacred. At the end of the columned path stood a small marble courtyard, intimate, quiet, untouched by the chaos behind. And there, beside a fountain carved in the shape of a phoenix, stood a woman dressed in flowing silver silk. She did not call out. She did not wave him over. She simply looked at him. Her gaze was steady, curious. "You are the only one still walking," she said gently as he approached. Her voice carried no manipulation, only calm observation. Kalen stopped a respectful distance away. "It seems so." She tilted her head slightly. "You passed the feast, the music, the games, the wine." "Yes." "Why?" He considered the question carefully. "Because I began walking for something greater than stopping." She studied him, stepping closer. "And what if the throne is not what you imagine? What if it brings burden, isolation, danger?" "It will," he replied without hesitation. She circled him slowly. "You are tired." "I am." "You are alone." "I have been alone before." Her expression softened, not seductive, not playful, but searching. "Do you know who I am?" she asked. "No." "I am Illyra Dovane, the king's niece, daughter of a fallen prince, raised within the palace walls." Kalen's heartbeat shifted slightly. "You were placed here to test me?" he asked quietly. A faint smile touched her lips. "Not placed. I chose to stand here." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. I have watched men boast, drink, compete, and collapse since dawn. I have seen pride devour them. I have seen hunger blind them. But you, she paused, you did not even look back. He met her eyes steadily. If I look back too long, he said, I begin to question why I walked at all. Elira searched his face for arrogance, and found none. For a moment, she admitted softly, I hoped you would stop. Why? Because ruling beside someone untempted is easier than ruling beside someone distracted. The sun dipped lower, the palace gates gleamed ahead. She stepped aside. One last question, she said. He waited. If I asked you to remain here with me instead of entering those gates, would you? Silence stretched between them. The fountain water trickled softly. Kaelin inhaled slowly. If you asked me tomorrow, he said gently, after I have fulfilled the reason I began walking, perhaps I would stay. Her eyes flickered, surprise, then understanding. He bowed slightly, but not before. Without another word, he continued toward the palace. Behind him, Elira did not call him back. She watched as he approached the towering iron gates. The guards crossed their halberds before him. Stop, one commanded. The king is occupied. The feast within is greater than any outside, another added. And you were late, said a third. Others arrived hours ago. Kaelin's eyes did not waver. I have been told many things today, he said calmly. None have moved me. The guards held their weapons firm. Inside the gates, unseen, King Alaric watched from the balcony, waiting. The sun hovered at the horizon's edge. And time was almost gone. The guards did not lower their weapons. Steel crossed before Kaelin's chest. The decree was clear, the first guard said sternly. Before sunset. Kaelin glanced at the sky. The sun balanced on the horizon like a coin about to fall. I am here, he replied. You are here, the second guard echoed, but you are not inside. A deliberate distinction. Behind the gates, music could be faintly heard, distant, regal, controlled, a different kind of celebration. The king receives no one now, said the third guard. He dines. Kaelin's breathing remained steady despite the ache in his legs. All day, he said calmly, I have been told to eat, to listen, to compete, to drink, to linger. The first guard's eyes narrowed. And now you are told to wait. Kaelin stepped forward. The halberds pressed against his chest. I did not walk to the gates, he said quietly, to be turned aside by words. You would push past royal guards? The second demanded. No, Kaelin replied evenly. I would step forward if you move. For a long second, nothing shifted. The sun dipped lower. From the balcony above, King Alaric leaned forward slightly. Chancellor Merrick stood beside him, breath held. Will he force them? Merrick whispered. Alaric's voice was soft. Watch. Below, the first guard adjusted his grip. Many men claimed confidence today, he said. All faltered. I am not many men, Kaelin answered. And what makes you different? He did not raise his voice. I finished what I started. Silence. Wind brushed through the courtyard. The sun touched the horizon. And then, the guards slowly lowered their weapons. The gates creaked open. Not because he demanded it. Not because he fought, but because he did not retreat. Kaelin stepped inside the palace courtyard just as the last edge of the sun vanished. Behind him, darkness began to settle over the festival grounds. Inside, torches flared to life. He was alone, no cheers, no applause, no crowd, just the echo of his own footsteps against marble. At the far end of the grand hall, beneath a ceiling painted with the history of Valareth, King Alaric descended from his throne. The old king did not look surprised. He looked relieved. You are late, Alaric said quietly. Kaelin bowed. I arrived before sunset. Alaric's eyes glimmered faintly. The sun sets differently, depending on where one stands. Kaelin did not argue. Instead, he said, Then judge me by where I stand now. Chancellor Merrick inhaled sharply. The hall was silent enough to hear a heartbeat. Alaric stepped closer, studying the young man's worn boots, dust-streaked clothes, and steady gaze. You saw the feast? Yes. And you were hungry? Yes. You saw the music? Yes. You heard applause in the arena? Yes. You passed the wine? Yes. You met my niece. Kalen hesitated for the first time. Yes. And yet, Alaric said softly, you stand here. Kalen's answer came without drama. I chose to. The king's lips curved slightly. Do you know, Alaric asked, why the festival existed? To delay the unready. No, the king said, to reveal them. Marek stepped forward in disbelief. Your Majesty, thousands began this morning. Not one stands here except this young man. Alaric turned to his chancellor. Because the road to power does not eliminate the weak, he said. It exposes them. He faced Kalen again. What is your name? Kalen Thorne. Son of? A cart maker who died before I could remember his voice. And why did you truly walk today? The king asked, voice quiet but piercing. Not for glory, not for comfort, not for pride. Why? Kalen held his gaze. Because someone must. The answer was simple, but it carried weight. King Alaric closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something had shifted. You did not rush, the king said. You did not boast. You did not react. You moved with intention. He removed the signet ring from his own finger. In this kingdom, Alaric declared, his voice echoing across marble, strength has long been mistaken for noise. He placed the ring into Kalen's hand. But discipline, he continued, is silent. Chancellor Marek fell to one knee. Guards followed. Servants bowed deeply. The hall filled with the echo of submission. From this moment forward, King Alaric proclaimed, Kalen Thorne shall be named heir to the throne of Valarith. No trumpets sounded, no fireworks erupted, just a quiet, irreversible decision. And outside the palace walls, the festival torches slowly dimmed, men stirred from cushions, musicians packed their instruments, wrestlers nursed bruises, archers argued scores, wine cups lay overturned. They looked toward the palace and saw the gates closed. And they understood. They had not been defeated by distance. They had been defeated by distraction. That night, the kingdom did not celebrate loudly. It murmured. In taverns across Valareth, voices rose in disbelief. A cart maker's apprentice? He owns nothing. He refused the feast? He walked past Elira? In the palace, Kalen stood alone on a balcony overlooking the darkened valley where the festival had stood. Elira joined him quietly. You could have stayed, she said softly. Yes. You could have eaten. Yes. You could have competed. Yes. You could have rested. Yes. She studied him again. And you will be tempted again. He nodded. I know. She leaned beside him against the stone railing. The throne is not the end of temptation, she said. It is the beginning. He exhaled slowly. Then I will keep walking. Far below, workers dismantled the stages. Silk banners came down. Tables were cleared. By morning, the road would look ordinary again. But thousands would never forget what they had chosen. Inside the throne room, King Alaric spoke quietly with Seraphel, who had arrived before nightfall. He is ready? The sage asked. Alaric looked toward the balcony where Kalen stood. He is unfinished, the king said. Seraphel smiled faintly. Good. And this was only the beginning, because becoming king would require more than resisting a single day of distraction. It would require resisting a lifetime of them. And the true trials of Valarith had not yet begun. Dawn rose quietly over Valarith. The festival grounds were gone. No silk, no stages, no scent of honeyed lamb. Just an empty stretch of road leading to the palace gates, plain, ordinary, almost innocent, as if nothing had happened. But inside the palace, everything had changed. Kalen stood in the Hall of Lineage, surrounded by towering statues of former rulers carved from white stone. Each face bore a different expression: pride, sternness, sorrow, triumph. King Alaric stood before him holding the ceremonial circlet, not the full crown, but the band worn by the declared heir. This, the king said quietly, is lighter than the crown. He placed it in Kalen's hands. But it feels heavier. Kalen studied the metal. It was simple gold, unadorned by jewels. No ornament? He asked. Alaric smiled faintly. Ornament invites admiration. Responsibility invites silence. Kalen allowed the circlet to rest upon his head. It did not change how he felt, but it changed how the room regarded him. Chancellor Merrick stepped forward with scrolls tucked beneath his arm. "Your first council meeting is at midday," he said briskly. "Trade disputes, border concerns, grain distribution. The northern provinces request additional guards." Kalen blinked. "So soon?" Merrick raised a brow. "The throne does not wait for comfort." King Alaric observed quietly. "This," he said, "is the next temptation." Kalen looked at him. "To delay duty because you feel unready." The council chamber was vast and circular. 12 seats formed a ring around a central stone table etched with a map of Valareth. Nobles entered with cautious curiosity. Whispers circled like restless birds. "That is him? The apprentice? He refused the wine?" Some eyes held doubt, others resentment. Kalen took his seat beside King Alaric. The first matter was presented. A merchant guild demanding higher tariffs on imported goods to weaken foreign competition. Lucian Harrow stood among them, now sober but visibly humbled. "Your Majesty," Lucian began carefully, bowing first to Alaric, then slightly to Kalen. "Valareth must protect its own prosperity." Kalen listened without interruption. He remembered Lucian at the feast. He remembered the honey on his fingers. "What do the farmers gain?" Kalen asked calmly. Lucian faltered. "The merchants gain stability." "And the farmers?" Kalen repeated. Silence lingered. Another council member interjected sharply. "Trade is complex. You cannot reduce it to simple fairness." Kalen turned to him. "Then explain it clearly." Murmurs rose. King Alaric watched without interfering. For hours, arguments surged. Voices overlapped. Egos flared. And for the first time, Kalen felt a different kind of temptation. Not pleasure, not rest, power, the ability to silence them, to command, to end debate with authority. His fingers brushed the circlet at his brow. He could raise his voice. He could assert dominance. Instead, he waited. When the room quieted slightly, he spoke. "A ruler does not protect prosperity by favoring the loudest voice," he said steadily. "He protects it by ensuring the quietest are not crushed." He turned to Lucian. "You will propose revised tariffs that protect both trade and harvest. Return tomorrow." Lucian bowed, subdued. The council dispersed slowly. Merrick approached, thoughtful. "You did not assert your rank," the chancellor observed. Kalen exhaled. "I did not need to." Above them, King Alaric's gaze softened. The boy who walked past distraction now faced a subtler challenge. Authority. And he had not reached for it recklessly. That evening, Seraphel summoned Kalen to the palace garden. Moonlight pooled across still water. "You resisted distraction," the sage said calmly. "Good." Kalen nodded respectfully. "But distraction returns wearing different faces." Seraphel gestured toward the palace walls. "Soon they will praise you." Kalen remained silent. "Soon they will criticize you." Still silent. "Soon they will tempt you not with wine or music, but with influence, loyalty, devotion." The sage stepped closer. "Which is harder to refuse?" Kalen answered honestly. "Praise." Seraphel smiled faintly. "Then that is what will test you next." From a distant balcony, Elira watched the conversation unfold. She saw not a king in training, but a man constantly choosing, and she wondered, how many times could one person choose restraint before it became exhaustion? The moon rose higher. Valareth slept. But the true shaping of its future ruler had only begun, and the challenges ahead would not be staged festivals. They would be real crises, real loss, real pressure. Because walking past distraction once makes a man worthy, but walking past it again and again, that makes him extraordinary. Word spread faster than wildfire through dry fields. By the third day after the proclamation, songs had already begun. Bards in taverns sang of the walker who would be king. Children reenacted the festival in the streets, pretending to resist imaginary feasts and invisible dancers. Merchants began carving small wooden charms shaped like boots, calling them thorn steps. Kalen noticed it first in the way people looked at him, not with doubt anymore, with admiration. When he walked through the lower markets, conversations softened. heads bowed slightly. A baker refused his coin and insisted he take bread for strength. A stable boy asked to touch the hem of his cloak for luck. Each gesture was small, each felt harmless, but Seraphel's warning echoed in his mind. Praise is sweeter than wine, harder to refuse. That afternoon, a sculptor arrived at the palace gates requesting permission to begin a statue of Caelan for the Hall of Lineage. History must be carved while it is fresh, the sculptor insisted proudly. Chancellor Merrick looked ready to approve it immediately. It would solidify your image, Merrick advised. Stability requires symbolism. Caelan studied the sketches. They depicted him tall, heroic, jaw set like granite, eyes lifted toward destiny. He barely recognized himself. I have done nothing yet, Caelan said quietly. You resisted temptation before thousands, Merrick replied. That is something. It was one day. One day can define a lifetime, Merrick countered. Caelan turned toward the window overlooking the city. Or it can mislead it. He handed the sketches back. No statue. Merrick blinked. But why? Because if I begin believing the carving, Caelan said softly, I will stop shaping myself. The sculptor left disappointed, but that night, Caelan slept easier. He had refused applause, and it had been harder than refusing wine. A week later, a rider arrived at dawn. His horse collapsed at the palace gate. The northern watchtower, the rider gasped. Burned. The council convened immediately. Bandits had crossed from the Frostmere borderlands. 2 villages looted, 1 guard post destroyed. Anger erupted in the chamber. Send a full battalion, one noble shouted. Seal the border, another demanded. Lucian Harrow, now more cautious in tone, argued that trade routes must remain open. Voices clashed. Caelan listened. Then King Alaric spoke for the first time in days. This is yours, he said quietly to Caelan. The chamber stilled. The temptation now was not comfort, not praise. It was reaction, to appear decisive, to respond with force. Caelan studied the map carved into the council table. How many bandits? He asked. Perhaps 30, a captain answered. And we would send how many soldiers? 100 at least. Caelan nodded slowly. And leave other borders thin? Silence. He turned to the captain. You will take 20 of your most disciplined riders. Murmurs erupted. 20? Someone scoffed. You will not chase them blindly, Caelan continued evenly. You will secure the villages first, restore guard posts, speak with the elders, understand how they crossed unseen. The captain hesitated. And if they attack again? They seek chaos, Caelan said. Do not give it to them. The room quieted. It was not the loudest decision, not the most dramatic, but it was measured. Alaric's eyes flickered with approval. Later that night, Elira joined Caelan in the courtyard. You chose restraint again, she observed. He exhaled. It is exhausting. She studied him carefully. You could have commanded a grand display. The people would have cheered. Yes, he admitted. And cheering does not rebuild villages. For the first time, she smiled not with curiosity, but with respect. Weeks passed. The northern villages stabilized. The bandits scattered after finding no chaos to exploit. Caelan's decisions earned quiet confidence. But power has a way of expanding silently. One evening, Chancellor Merrick approached him privately. There is a proposal, Merrick said carefully. A decree that would allow you to override council votes in matters of urgency. Caelan raised an eyebrow. And who defines urgency? You, Merrick replied. The parchment felt heavy in Caelan's hand. With one signature, debate could be shortened, resistance softened, efficiency increased. He imagined future arguments dissolving instantly under his authority. No delays, no frustration, no endless discussion. It would make ruling easier. Marek watched him closely. Many great kings have taken this step. And many tyrants, Caelan replied quietly. He set the parchment down. If I cannot persuade the council, he said, then I have not led them. Merrick studied him for a long moment. You refuse control? I refuse unnecessary control. Outside the chamber, Seraphel stood in shadow, having heard enough. The sage smiled faintly. The boy who walked past wine now walked past power, and that path was narrower still. But greater trials were approaching because temptation does not repeat itself, it evolves. And soon, Valarith would face a challenge no festival could simulate, one that would test not only Kaelin's restraint, but his resolve under loss. The first snow came early that year, not soft, not gentle. It fell hard and fast, swallowing roads and fields before harvest wagons could complete their journeys. Frost gripped the northern provinces, and word spread quickly through the kingdom. Grain stores were freezing, livestock were dying, children were falling ill. The council chamber felt colder than the wind outside. "We must protect the capital reserves," one noble insisted. "If we drain them now, the entire kingdom risks famine." Lucian Harrow, representing merchant guilds, argued to sell grain at increased prices to prevent panic buying. "It is simple economics," he said carefully. "Scarcity must be controlled." Controlled. The word lingered. Kaelin listened in silence. He could feel the weight of every voice pressing toward him. Protection of the center. Protection of wealth. Protection of stability. All logical, all defensible. And yet... "What of the northern villages?" Kaelin asked quietly. "They are always harsh in winter," a counselor replied. "They endure." "Endure," Kaelin repeated softly. He stood. "Release the royal reserves," he said calmly. Gasps. Merrick leaned forward. "All of them?" "Enough to sustain every village until thaw." "That risks shortage here," another protested. Kaelin's voice remained steady. "Then we ration here as well." "You would have the capital suffer?" "I would have the kingdom survive." The room fell silent. It was the boldest decision he had made yet. Not dramatic, but costly. Within days, royal wagons moved north under heavy guard, not to defend, but to deliver. Grain, medicine, blankets. Word spread quickly. The heir had opened the reserves. In the capital, murmurs began. "He weakens us. He endangers the treasury. He is sentimental." Kaelin heard it all. He also heard something else, a quieter whisper inside himself. What if they are right? That doubt was new. During the festival, temptation had been external. Now it was internal. He stood one night in the storage halls where grain sacks had once been stacked high. Now the space echoed. Elira approached quietly. "You are wondering if you were reckless," she said gently. He did not deny it. "If spring harvest fails," he said, "we may all starve." "And if you had done nothing?" "They would have starved first." She studied him. "Then why does doubt linger?" He stared at the empty hall. "Because leadership means choosing who suffers less." Silence stretched between them. "Restraint is not the absence of fear," Elira said softly. "It is action despite it." For the first time, Kaelin allowed himself to sit on the cold stone floor. Just for a moment. Not in defeat, in wait. Spring did come, late, but it came. And with it, something unexpected. The northern villages, strengthened by the grain deliveries, had organized. They had planted early root crops under protective coverings. They had repaired irrigation channels. They had prepared better than any previous winter. When the first wagons rolled back toward Valareth, they did not carry requests. They carried surplus. Merrick stood stunned as reports arrived. "They send back double what we gave." Kaelin read the letters quietly. "You trusted us," one elder had written. "So we strengthened ourselves." The council chamber shifted that day. The nobles who had questioned him spoke more carefully now. Lucian Harrow bowed slightly deeper when addressing him. King Alaric, watching from the throne, allowed himself a long breath. That evening, Seraphel approached Kaelin in the garden once more. "You feared you had weakened the kingdom," the sage said. "Yes." "And what did you learn?" Kaelin looked toward the horizon where fields shimmered green again. "That restraint is not always holding back," he said slowly. "Sometimes it is releasing control." Seraphel nodded. "The boy who walked past temptation is becoming something rarer." "What is that?" Kaelin asked. "A man who understands consequence." Summer arrived warm and generous. Harvest promised abundance. Peace settled over Valareth like a long exhale. And then King Alaric fell ill. It began as fatigue, then fever. Then long days confined to bedchambers once filled with command. Physicians moved quietly through corridors. Council meetings grew heavier. For the first time, Kalen sat at the head of the circular table alone. He did not announce himself as king. He did not rush the ceremony, but decisions flowed through him now, without hesitation, measured, grounded. One evening, Elira stood beside him outside the royal chambers. "You are already ruling," she said softly. "I am borrowing the weight," he replied. She looked at him carefully. "And when it becomes yours?" He did not answer immediately. "I will keep walking?" Inside the chamber, Alaric called for him. The old king's voice was weaker now, but his eyes remained sharp. "You resisted pleasure," Alaric murmured. "Yes." "You resisted praise." "Yes." "You resisted power." "I tried." Alaric smiled faintly. "The crown is not a reward for resistance." Kalen leaned closer. "It is a responsibility to continue it." The old king's hand tightened around his. "Then you are ready." Outside, thunder rolled across distant hills. A storm was gathering, not of winter, not of famine, but of transition. And when morning came, Valarith would awaken to a new ruler, not born to power, not carved in stone, but shaped by every step he chose not to stop walking. And the greatest test was still ahead. Because ruling wisely in peace is difficult, but ruling wisely when challenged from beyond the kingdom's borders, that would demand everything he had learned. Continuing. Try to end the story, it's too long. King Alaric Dovane passed before the first light of dawn. No trumpet announced it, no dramatic cry echoed through the halls, just a stillness. The kind that settles when something great has completed its time. By midday the bells of Valarith tolled slowly, and the kingdom gathered in solemn silence. Farmers stood beside merchants, soldiers beside scholars. Even those who had once mocked the apprentice now bowed their heads. And in the great hall, before the same marble floor he had once crossed alone at sunset, Kalen Thorne knelt. The full crown, heavier than the circlet, adorned yet dignified, was placed upon his head. He did not feel triumph, he felt continuation. When he rose, the hall waited for a grand speech. Instead, he spoke simply. "I walk to these gates because someone must lead with discipline," he said steadily. "I stand here now because discipline must continue." He did not promise glory. He did not promise conquest. He promised steadiness, and that steadiness became the foundation of his reign. In the years that followed, Valarith did not become the loudest kingdom in the world. It became the most stable. When neighboring rulers postured for dominance, Kalen negotiated before drawing steel. When harvests were abundant, he stored wisely. When advisors praised him excessively, he redirected credit. When critics challenged him publicly, he listened before responding. And when temptation returned, as it always does, it no longer arrived as grand festivals or velvet tents. It arrived quietly, in the urge to react too quickly, in the desire to silence opposition, in the comfort of being admired. Each time he remembered the road, the feast, the music, the arena, the wine, the whisper at dusk. He remembered that the throne was not won by overpowering others, but by mastering himself. Queen Elira often stood beside him in later years, not as a distraction, but as an equal partner in wisdom. Together, they ruled with balance rather than excess. And the story of the festival road was told for generations, not as a tale about resisting food or pleasure, but as a reminder. The greatest obstacles are rarely walls. They are invitations. Years later, when Kalen walked the same road outside the palace, now empty and ordinary, a young boy once asked him, "Your Majesty, where did you become king?" Kalen looked down the long stretch of path and smiled faintly. "Not at the palace gates," he said. "Then where?" He pointed gently behind them. "Back there. Every time I chose to keep walking." Success is not stolen by difficulty. It is surrendered to distraction. Pleasure delays, praise blinds, power intoxicates. But the person who continues forward, quietly, steadily, intentionally, will eventually stand where others meant to. Not because they were the strongest, not because they were the loudest, but because they did not stop. And that is how an apprentice became king, not in a single moment of victory, but in every moment he refused to be ruled by anything but purpose.